Hi, everybody. We're the collaborators for um, CreateAWorld. My name is Tantra Mad, and people introduce themselves as they speak if they need to. I wanted to start the call today. I made a request to do that. And I want to start it with the phenomenon of being in a living story. The reason the seven of us started this conversation and invited people to share conversation with us is we wanted to be part of a living story. We wanted to be part of um, 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 a phenomenon of existence that is occurring right now that we're all lending our lives to, all of us, whether we know it or not. So I'm going to do a short story about what happened to me last night because it really points to that all of us are part of a story, and we shape the story according to what we think life is. So I was at a red light last night in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I was stopped. There was a lady in front of me, and all of a sudden I saw behind me a car, a low rider, coming at me, probably about 40 miles an hour. My ex-boyfriend was a ex, like this is 50 years ago, was a mechanic in Indy 500. He taught me how to race. So I very naturally lifted my foot off the brake, which is not what people would normally do. He slammed into me, and then I tapped the brake to avoid hitting the woman, and miraculously the light changed, and I never hit her. He backed up, went around, and looked like he was fleeing. And I carefully nursed my car into the adjoining parking lot. But what was interesting is the community showed up, and there were tales about this young man before we met him. Tales that he must either be a drug addict or not have a license or have no insurance, and he was fleeing the scene. So I'm on the phone with my children are very hypersensitive about their mothers. So I had my son and my daughter and my other son all trying to get to me on the phone together. I'm trying to talk to the people outside my car that are telling me what happened. And all of a sudden this young man is there and he said, "Hi, I'm the young man that hit you." And he came to apologize. And he had no driving, he'd never had a wreck. What had happened is he had tried to get out of me so I could get out from behind my car so that I could get to off the road, and his brakes were squishy and he couldn't get them to catch until they got about to the stop sign. So that's why he did not flee the scene. And yet everybody was having the story about this young man and why he fled the scene, but he didn't. And it was such a moment, and I'm fine. I have no whiplash, no nothing. The back end of my car is now indented strongly. But it was just such an interesting phenomenon for me that how easily we look at events from a certain point of view. And it really is just to say there's a certain point of view. The other story I want to tell is many, many, many years ago, probably, a good 20 years ago now. I was standing in the home in Ireland of Celine's son, Celine, who owned this home in Ireland on Achill Island. And her son and I, Finbar, were actually joking. Good crack, it's called in Ireland. Good crack. It's like joking. And we were joking about the cost of service and the love of it, the love of giving our lives in service of others. And at the same time, joking about the cost and joking about the, and then I have to do this, and oh my God, then I have to do that. How could they ever, those kind of things, but also loving that we live to provide service to humanity. And he was an EMT. He went around the world into very strife-driven countries to take care of the wounded and the harmed. And he died in Ukraine doing his job. And they can't find his body. And his mother, Celine, my friend, said that it's such a mixed thing. There's such a joy that her son died doing what he loved, and such an agony that she doesn't have a child anymore. So we were talking about it before we came on the call, about just this depth of activity that we're in right now that hits the most profound aspects of our emotions. Hits the unexplainable, the uncontrollable, the not able to settle easily in our emotional field. And we're going to do a little bit of raw feed today. We're going to, all of us, or most of us, have watched the other videos or were present to the other videos that we did this month. And we're going to lace those in and out of this conversation of also what we've been experiencing, of what we've been paying attention to. And I really want to start on a less, for the general public, maybe a less accepted end of things. But it seems it's quite possible that the veil between being alive and not being alive doesn't exist. It's quite possible that life doesn't end when you die. And it's quite possible that we stay in relationship with each other forever. I think if we thought that was true, we might take better care of relationship. I think we might. So I'm actually going to turn it over to Victoria for her story, and then we're going to open it up to everybody else, and off we go. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Tandra. The way you just languaged that the veil may be no different is exactly the experience that's upon me, that I just received news that my dear friend's godson, who was in his mid-40s, he passed at 2:30 this morning while I was in dream time with him. And I had awakened early this morning, and I was in conversation with Tim, and Tim, my husband, he just said, we haven't heard from Sharon about how this young man's doing. It's crazy. I can't even bring his name up in my mind right now. It helped me out. But he said, do you think he's passed? And I said, I don't know. I can't seem to locate him, but he was in my dream time this morning. And to have this living story unfold an hour later, that we get the news that he passed at 2:30 this morning while I was in dream time. The rest of the story that helps me celebrate that maybe there is no separation, that we live the story on, is that 2 days prior, he went unconscious, and so he was unconscious until he left the physical. But the day before that, he was on the autistic spectrum as well. So he didn't communicate and didn't have the same languaging, but he played the piano. And the day before he went unconscious, he told his dad, he said, I'd like to play the piano. And this is a young man who played all kinds of music, from pop to jazz to spiritual music. And he sat down, and Howard said, let me record this. And so he put the recorder on, and this young man played Amazing Grace. And when I heard that, I said, I'll never hear that song the same, because he was a young man that just brought pure light to people. He was so sweet, and he brought it in his own language. And the fact that he came into my dream time with me when he was in his transitioning is such a gift for holding capacity for each other in community. And so I could share that with my friend Sharon, to share with Howard, to know that he continues to live with us. He's part of our living story and we're part of his. It's just such a gift and so remarkable that I have tears of sadness and joy simultaneously. And now I know I can locate him. I understand why I couldn't locate for sure what I was thinking for 2 days. And now I know I can locate you now. So that's all I have for the moment.
Thanks, Victoria. We had another death in the field of Tantramat that was, I also said to someone, would you check on her? I can't locate her. And found out she'd passed the night before. You know, the phenomenon, the CreateAWorld is brought to you by the field of Tantramat, not me, but the unity of heaven and earth and balance, proportion, symmetry, grace, and beauty, which is Mat. And part of it is to discover the phenomenon of coherency, the ability to be connected, the ability to be in unity with all life as a living experience. And this is some of the phenomenon that the grace of being alive has provided, and it's a beautiful thing. Okay, who else?
Well, there was a death. My ex-daughter-in-law had a friend who is 40 years old who died from a complication of surgery. And what struck me was that's very hard, but what it is all she needed to do was to say to my son, there's been a death and I need to be with the family. Can you care for the kids? Because it was her day. And there was an immediate yes. There was an immediate, we'll cover dinner, don't worry about that. And then her son who was the friend. His heart at 12 years old went out to the family or to his mom because he knows the pain. He has observed the pain of death. And I guess I was just struck by, it's like the community came up to you after the car wash. All my daughter-in-law had to say was, a friend has died and I need to be with the family. And immediately, those of us who were involved in the care of the kids and the child and one of the kids was immediately, what can we do? You know, we'll do whatever needs to be done to support you or support her in being with the family. So it's that cohesive response, coherent response of a community to a shift in the dynamic. Because when I view, you know, it's like when we had a baby born this week too in my family, little guy yesterday. And, you know, when my experience is when babies are born in families, the whole family constellation shifts as if to make room for a new matrixing within that community. And it really does happen after birth. And when death occurs, it's not as dramatic as a rematrixing. It's like the matrix slowly shifts, but the individual energy is still there, but it's much lighter. And, you know, and it is a process of watching when new life comes in, when a child is born, everybody seems to shift almost automatically. Well, we've had 9 months to be prepared for the shift, right? When someone dies, the shifting is less obvious to me. And it isn't as if they are truly gone, because their presence, it's almost as if you thought about, when I look at it, it's like a 3D matrix, but when someone dies, that 3D matrix turns into a fifth dimension, sixth dimension matrix that still holds their energy in some way to the family and to the people that are connected to the individual. So life and death are just parts of entering into and out of this particular dimensional experience. Because my take is that it's not the only one we've ever had, and it's not the only one we will ever have. And it's this, how was it, the heart allows us to know their presence or to honor their presence, whether they be coming in or they be coming out, in a truly profound way. It isn't just an entrance into this matrix, 3D matrix of relationship, but it's an experiencing something deeper, what I say.
And we've been having a lot of conversation about and bring wisdom of the indigenous people on our planet. And I think when you look at the many rituals and processes they have around death, I think it's much more of an honoring, that it's a transition from one way of being to another way of being. And one of the reasons, Electra, that you're, that you're talking about the, the sort of the slowness at which the matrix readjusts for death. It's because I think in our more modern cultures, some people have particular religion. We've lost the sort of the in our body experience of life cycles, and the fact that there is kind of going, and I think because we've lost touch with that, we behave as if we don't know what to do when somebody transitions next phase. I think probably if we could all investigate internally, we would realize that we do instinctively know what to do. It might look different for each of us, but to me, I think one of the challenges generally, and also when I think about everything that's going on, weather-wise, there are things that our modern world has lost touch with, and it wisdom of knowing how to move the mother and the cycles of birth and death and on to what's next. And so I'm personally grateful for this conversation this morning.
When I found out that Finbar had died in the Ukraine, I didn't know him. But I was really, really struck by just that paradox that Tantra mentioned. So glad he got to give his life for what he loved and believed in, and just really devastated that he had died at all, and that somehow seemed to need to happen, or whatever the interpretation could be. But what it really threw me into was the flip side of what it is to keep living when people have passed. And I don't mean that in the sense of overcoming the grief and whatnot, because that is part of it, obviously. in varying degrees to, the different people in that person's configuration. But what it is to, like, I was very affected. And then that threw me into, sorry, people, here I go. How have I been affected? Or somehow kind of feeling affected by all the grannies who did whatever they did so their grandchildren could be the first ones to go to school. All the, Martin Luther King, whom I never knew, or I didn't even go to any of his marches. I was way too young. All the people across all the millennia that have somehow had a knowing that life could be better, and, or at least, I don't know what to say, good, because there's a lot about life that's great. There's definitely a lot changing right now. I felt like on a spider web, a bug comes in and it moves the thread. It felt like that. I felt like the threads were being moved. And how did I receive that information or energy and keep living, folded into the continuing of my life and the lives of people around me? And I think, I don't know, I don't really have answers for that yet. I just noticed that phenomenon in the last day or two, and just really, but it started me wondering how much phenomenon like gratitude and paying attention to what's good, what's quote unquote bad, that it's almost like it made everything seem much clearer and much more observable. I don't know how to really explain what I'm talking about. Because it isn't like some sudden epiphany or revelation. I don't really know how to explain it. But it was really, how do I keep living? What is living from this point forward? And because the composition changed by Finbar's death, the death of the person Victoria's referring to, that Electra's referring to, umpteen gabillion people we don't even know about. Not just because, well, you're born and then you die somehow, but there seems to be a lot different, at least to me. Is it because I'm paying attention? Is it because something's different now? I don't know, but I was very, very aware of all the people who've been of service in a notable way, but that I think everybody is of service. This is kind of unrelated, but I met somebody last weekend, the Earth Day event for forester.org, and we did a CreateAWorld with one of the people who works there, March 31st, if you want to look that one up. And they did their event where they were sharing, all about what it is to make these connections in the neighborhood, glean from people's houses, what is compost, wonderful books, children's books, to just educate, have fun, connect. I got a little tomato plant from there, they'd come and gotten oranges from my tree the day before, and they were all out there. People got to have their oranges. And when I was waiting for my ride, just sitting there, this lady walked up and started talking to me. And there were some indications that she could be defined by some mental health issues. But she was telling the story of who she is in relation to serving people, in relation to helping people have food, even when her situation seems kind of unstable. And I thought, you know what? I could sit there in the story of, I see signs of possible schizophrenia. I see signs of, she's not walking to the beat of the same drummer as I am. And I could live in the story she was telling about who she is, that kept her anchored, kept her, I don't know, it was her story of her contribution. And I thought, I think that one's more interesting. She said all kinds of interesting things. And then suddenly my ride was here and she said, "Goodbye, Miss Lady." And I thought, that's something to really steep in for myself, to consider living in other people's stories of themselves. Maybe that's how I use well the service that people provide over the generations.
And just from being alive.
Yeah.
If I could have taken a picture, I said to my housemate, see, in a way I was on Saturday Night Live, because I had the liquor store owner tell the young man vaping, smelling of cannabis, to go see if the lady was okay. I had 3 people wrapped in blankets on the curb with their blankets around her, racing over to see if the lady was okay. I had the FedEx guy. I had a woman who took a picture of the car on the way to her daughter's birthday party. I had a neighbor come out because you needed to go tell the neighbors the lady was okay. It was such a potpourri of humanity. I forgot the 3 kids that wanted me to know that they got the first 2 letters of the license plate, that were biking. But it was, if I could have done a video of those 5 minutes of who was standing at my car, I said to somebody, one of the men, I said, this is why I love Albuquerque. This is why I love my town. It's community, and it's a really messed up town, and I adore it. And 3 people piped up and said, we moved here because this town is community. And yet it's not all spick and span clean. It's got everything going on in it you could ever hope, on steroids, basically. And yet there's this affinity for life here, and this lighthearted humor and caring that is remarkable. And I want to dedicate our time together today for how every human being is in service of life. I think that's a great dedication. And it's obviously what we're all paying attention to, and why we're taking an hour of our Fridays to have this conversation. Beautiful.
That so pings me about a world event happening tomorrow, World Tai Chi and Qigong Day, where across the globe, the world, everyone at 10 o'clock is practicing some form of their connection with creation, if you will. I mean, that's my definition. And as we're sharing, like Tantra, when you shared, there was like a ping in me to like, oh my God, yeah, perspective, widen out our perspective, and how quickly can we shift back into that grounded, centered humanity place of being, where life is what is important, And then Victoria, oh my God, Amazing Grace. I love Amazing Grace. And with your willingness to share, I have a different relationship now that broadens my way of being in that song, with that song. And you know, just Electra, Deb, as you speak, I mean, I've dealt with life and death my entire life, especially as a young girl, losing both of my parents tragically, and being able to learn and be in the moment, in my heart, with people, with engagements, animals, nature, whatever it may be. And when that cycle happens to come around to shift it, how can I stay in my heart with it rather than in the, oh, you know, I should have done that, or, you know, I didn't love my animals enough, or whatever it is, you know, and shifting from the mind into the fullness of our hearts, that for me creates that evidence of what you spoke about, Tantra. Is there really a veil between life and death, right? Anyone that's ever left this earth that I have been engaged with, connected with, is with me, you know, and I just love this conversation. And I think that we need more of it. So I appreciate the subject matter today. We all experience some form of life and death. And that's, you know, brings me back to the World Tai Chi and Qigong Day. One world, one breath, you know, and I'm glad to be here today.
And I'm glad you advertised it, because now I will push back and flip on my Tai Chi master and do it at 10 o'clock when we're done here, in between then getting back on a meeting for all of us. So it's fun.
Along the lines of is there a separation between, or a veil between life and death? There's so much, I guess I haven't sorted where I reside or land in that conversation. But when you were talking, Lori, you sparked me to, well, is there a veil between life and life? I keep thinking about that lady's conversation with me last Saturday. And what was the risk, or even with the people helping Tantra and gathering around her, you know, who were vaping or high, or, you know, whatever. What was the risk I took if I decided to land in the story of, oh, she's obviously not quite all there, you know, whatever I could have said, as opposed to her story? That seemed to have been a risk, a veil to me, the extraordinariness of the person, the young man Victoria's talking about. There just seems to be so many territories or ways to look at things, and a lot of risk in choosing. And that's as far as I can go with that one.
Welcome to the mystery.
Yeah, it is a mystery. I'm very struck by being with those who have left the planet this week in particular that we've been talking about, and I kind of see it as there's I have this bouquet of flowers that I'm gathering, and there's that vibrancy in Tantra. I was always struck by, you said, you don't want to when you're close to a person dying, how you take in their life force. And I'm so with that in these people that, you know, we have been talking about this week, that maybe I didn't know them, but I'm gathering a flower from each life of their life force and honoring that, bringing that into my life experience. And it's now fed my soul. It's just, God, it's just so fulfilling a feeling. I also lost a child when she was 11 months old. And so gathering her life force, I still feel I work with her. She came for a very specific purpose. She came to, well, one, to just be in relationship with older people, because I would take her into the supermarket and she would attract older people like bees to, you know, a flower, and they would communicate. And this was, you know, an infant. It was stunning. And then she left the gift of, she died of the first strain of pneumococcal meningitis. And as a result, children can be immunized now for that. And so I was very grateful to find out that information from a friend who was a microbiologist and gave me that information. And so I've taken her service and been with that all these years. This was 1999 when she died. And so, you know, I that's how I see this, you know. I didn't know Finbar at all, but when I looked into all that he was, I'm taking that in and now carrying that in my tool bag to, you know, be in the flow of what his life was, to then radiate that out. So it's this beautiful flow to me of life and then transitioning. I see my daughter's death as such a gift, because her death also awakened me to all that life could offer. And so I just, you know, in today's conversation, I just feel this beautiful flow, and that we do take each person's presence here on the planet, you know, and use that as part of these threads. I love how you were talking about the spider web, Deb. And I do this exercise with kids at camp, where, you know, you throw the yarn, you have a ball of yarn, and you hold on to a thread and you throw it out to each person until the ball is gone. And then you have one person step out, and then you talk about, well, what happens to the weave when that one person steps out. And granted, yes, it, like Electra said, it shifts the dynamic of the web, but then, like a spider will repair that, right? The spider will connect those threads again. So that's what I feel all these lives do. They're part of this beautiful web of connection, and they don't leave. They don't leave us. They're part of us now. That's a beautiful thing.
I want to clarify what Liz was saying. I was raised in the Appalachians of Tennessee, and it's a Appalachian tradition. The last breath, it's called the death breath. And all the community would come, the family and community would sit around the person who was dying, because that last, after that death rattle, there's a breath. And that, according to the Appalachian tradition, this was the breath for the community. So they would still belong to their community. And so that that breath was for us. that breath was for us. So I was sat in on that tradition because my mother used to go, her art teacher was really in the backwoods of the Appalachians. And I would sit where they were churning butter, and they didn't have phones or cars, and churning butter. But I got to sit in on a few deaths when I was 9 and 10 years old, and it stayed with me. And it's interesting too. And one of the beliefs in a lot of the new consciousness that's rising, we had Christian, who I hadn't talked to in almost 40 years, found his way back to me, as well as Mary Pat. And but the new consciousness is that we are a shared soul, the human beings. We're symbiotic. We are each other. We are part of each other, and that we don't do well when we're harming each other. We become ill because harm is actually alien to the nature of our being, and we are at that point where we are actually having to survive. But the interesting thing about having to survive now is we'll probably learn how to. We'll have to learn to survive by being whole, by being alive, by being frisky, by being related. So the wheel always turns back to being in unity with life, no matter how ornery we get about following the web. We are being turned back into being unity in life, because that's how the planet created us, and planet and the cosmos created us. And so it's kind of an epic moment in time.
That seems to be the theme of a lot of the conversations we're having, both in, I have two different groups that I'm with. One is discussing Charles Einstein's next stories about how do we find the next, or how do we create the next story for humanity to create a sustainable future. And one about discussing chapters from Santok by Yonka Porta. And he also says, he gives as an example what the indigenous people do as a model for how we might look at the world differently. And in every call, it comes back to that issue of we each have to, like Deb said yesterday on a call, she said, you got to stop and you got to listen. And when you listen for something differently, or you look to see the differences. And they may be subtle in the beginning. And as you continue to look, you can see something that then gives you a different perspective and then allows us to act differently. And it's the word thrive. We're looking for a future where humanity thrives. So my great-grandchildren, great-great-great-great-grandchildren down the line will live in a world where they can thrive. And everyone on those calls is committed to that. And we're all searching for what is it in the present moment that shows me that life is different. And then how can I, as an individual, come to life differently? Because I really believe, even if I'm not going to be around for great-grandchildren to be alive and thriving, but I can, and each of us can, change how we act within the world and with others to impact that world that they'll have. So the whole conversations we've had for the entire month, and that in those two groups, is about that phenomenon. And where are we looking differently? Where are we looking differently, and how are we looking differently, so that we see opportunities and differences that not only make our life really nice, because this whole conversation about how interconnected we are, both the birthing of life and the death of life, tells us that we're interconnected on all these other levels of living every day, which is the point that I think Deb was making, was that it's in the living of life that we make the difference.
Oh, I want to jump in and tell a little story. a living story of an older gentleman sitting at the dog park with his dog. And a young man comes in with his beautiful, sleek blue heeler and sits down next to this older man. And the older man notices his appearance. He's got a biker jacket on, he's got tattoos, he's got the big earrings and nose and all of this really colorful expression of who he is. And he's thinking, oh, okay, he's different from me. And they start chatting. And they spent about a half an hour chatting about this and that and having just such a grand time. And the dogs like interacting and saying, okay, you're cool, you're cool. And then they go about and do their thing. And this was my hubby's experience a couple of days ago that he shared with me. And he said, yeah, for a moment, I said, I don't have any way of relating to him. And I decided not to assume that and just see what would happen. That broader, deeper, wider perspective of a living story. And they ended up at the end of their chit chat time saying, well, I come to the dog park all the time. I'll see you. And I'm like, I think he's going to be a dog park regular now just to see this young man who gave him a wider lens in which he could relate to someone that he wasn't sure if he could, but he gave it a chance. A living story of how to be with one another. I just think it's great. Like, I like this dude. And I have to tell you, the one big story of that was he said he has to exercise this dog a lot. That's this dog's nature. He needs lots of exercise. So the guy rides a motorcycle and he hooks his dog up alongside and he drives his motorcycle and the dog keeps up at 20 miles an hour over to the dog park and exercises him. Like, oh my, this is Albuquerque, all of its flavors. A guy motorcycling down the road with his dog running alongside the motorcycle. You cannot find this anywhere else, right? I love this community too.
But how beautiful. That is such a perfect demonstration. He could have shut it down by making all the assumptions of, you know, who that person was because of his colorful expression. I could have shut it down with that lady. And not only would I have missed out, but the risk of shutting down her story of herself as someone who feeds others and does whatever else she was saying that was quite positive. I don't even care if it was delusional. That's who she knew herself to be. And it may have been she once did and will again. Who knows? You know, none of that's my business. I think that's the articulation for what I'm talking about. The life with life and the risk of landing in one story or sticking to one story and not being able to flow into something else that is life enhancing. I mean, wow. And look what came out of it for him personally, both of them actually. Just amazing. That's so glorious. Thank you.
I have to end with, because Victoria, you're muted. I have to end the story of the young man because my daughter sent me home to get water because the people hadn't picked up the car yet, and the young man was still waiting on his mother. And so I come back, and the young man and my daughter are sitting on the curve, and he's sketching something. And he stands up and walks over to me and hands me a sketch of an angel. And he said, "Thank you for being my angel." And it is amazing. But Deb, you know, you and I have been talking this week about in our psyche, we naturally predict outcome. You know, like for those people, some of the people that we're talking about, this young man, not all, but some said, you know, he must be an addict, or he must not have a driver's license, or he must be part of a gang, none of which he was at all. He doesn't even drink. And but it was part of a predicted outcome, assumed predicted outcome. And one of the things Deb and I have been discussing about, for those of you watching or will watch, how hooked we are on predicted outcome, and how outcomes aren't necessarily predictable anymore. So it's not only the stories like Victoria told and all of us told, it's that there's this funny feeling that something is, you know, Leonard Cohen has a song called there's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. And there is this eerie feeling that some of us are experiencing, that there is a crack. And that which operates on behalf of life, that which is community and unity with others. It does seem like that little thread of that spider is finding its way out through that light to build an entirely new web. And there's not evidence at the level that humanity looks for evidence, but I would suggest there's a strong suspicion. Victoria, yeah.
And what thought I was adding is that this young man was open to sitting with an older person without any predictive story and just being present. So that was the magic for me, is to recognize both present with one another. And that's the crack that you're talking about, Tandra. It made me think of that too.
And as the Irish would say, that's the good crack.
That's the good crack. Oh, what a way to start the closing.
I think we came to our own conclusion. Over to you, Lori.
I was just going to say, I love, you know, we each can just develop that in ourselves, right? To be with and like honoring the sacredness of the living story. And we don't know what the ripple is going to be. So the more present we are in our connections, in our activities, in our work, in our relationships, it allows that light to shine through the crack, and it invites others into their light.
All right, I'm gonna jump in, Lori, because this could be quite an opportunity for me, if not others. I'm pretty fond of prediction. I'm pretty fond of knowing how things are going to go. And that, but I'm also pretty quick to shift into the present in a lot of circumstances and be with what is. So, and in those moments, it's wonderful, but it is not part of my minute to minute kind of existence. I don't know, would you say it's possible to live that way moment to moment, or that it's possible to have that be relatively comfortable, or is trying to have it be comfortable? Because I don't find it comfortable. I don't find it, I'm not good at it. So
Yeah.
Now what?
Well, you know, I appreciate that predicted outcome. I have that, and sometimes it serves me, sometimes it doesn't serve me, right? So I learned, I've done the Tai Chi, my movement practices, my sitting meditations, things that help me to keep returning and truing myself back to center. And we all have that capability of doing that. And it's all of it. It's uncomfortable. It's cool. It's inspiring. It's fun. It's like, oh my God, like what the heck is happening? And how can we be with it all? And that's what I do. But I know that place that I can rest in. And I know that place where it's like, oh, I am so connected with you right now in your story, in my story, and the two stories are meeting. And there's no forsaking one for the other. You are there together. That interdependent, symbiotic way of being, that is developable, if that's a word. And it's like a yummy place to be. So yes.
I also think it's a tolerance point. I think right now I think we have to tolerate the crashing of two ships into each other, because our systems are shifting. We think it's our personalities, but actually it's our shiftings. One of the best quotes I ever heard, we have 4 minutes. One of the best quotes I ever heard is, not what's happening, is you don't measure your life by your circumstance, measure your life by the capacity for your return to yourself. And I really love that, because that makes, well, what's the self? And it instantly points to the self is not our circumstances. I mean, instantly. And and I do think the conversation, Deb and Lori, that you're having is the key conversation. It is worthy of investigation. I've been in my industry since I was 19 years old. I'll be 77 in a month. And my whole life is geared to how fast I can return to myself. Because any outside vehicle is random and elusive and not always there. And I do think that's the training humanity is in. It shows up in things like people not going back to work. It's showing up in physical systems having a really hard time right now, and psychological systems having a really hard time right now, because the standard for being here and the standard for being alive has changed. And there's a new standard now that then internally I'm watching people everywhere experience, whereupon I have a police car, a fire engine, and an ambulance going through my driveway, my street right now. I don't think you all can hear it. No. but it's a fascinating moment in time, and I pray with all my heart that human beings don't think they have to stay fixated in a position about reality, that they at least have a crack, that they can consider that something, that while that reality could be real, there could be other realities that are emergent that take care of something they crave, that maybe the universe knows how to provide. So we are completing. This sped through like rapid fire, and I so appreciate today. I so appreciate all of you, and I so appreciate the viewers. Soft and gentle. Take care of you, everyone.